Remember Jonathan McIntosh? If you don't, let me refresh your memory. Earlier in this decade, McIntosh and his partner, Anita Sarkeesian, were running the YouTube channel Feminist Frequency, which purported to critique today's popular culture from a feminist point of view. But their criticisms were so off the mark, and so bigoted, that multitudes of people were disgusted and enraged by watching them. Numerous channels began criticizing their videos, and found a huge audience. There are many currently successful channels on YouTube that owe their initial success to McIntosh and Sarkeesian. For me, too, coming across Feminist Frequency was a transformative moment. As a liberal feminist, I always knew that there were radical feminists on the fringes of the movement. But seeing how the feminist establishment embraced Anita Sarkeesian made me realize that the radicals have now become the mainstream. It was one of the main things that alerted me to the rise of the social justice warriors and the danger that they present to liberal society, and prompted me to start this channel. Looking back, this was an important cultural moment. Many anti-SJW movements, insignificant until then, united together and helped each other find an audience and grow. Gamergate was the initial spark, but Feminist Frequency provided the fuel that turned it into a large fire, and I am not at all sure that this would have happened without Sarkeesian and McIntosh. They played their part so perfectly, providing one juicy video after the other, videos that were so bad that they were just fun to dissect, ridicule, use as platform for counter-arguments, and just have a good laugh. It was so easy that everyone had a go. Years later, the anti-SJW movement has become a true cultural and political force, whereas Anita Sarkeesian is all but forgotten. She still uploads regularly on her Feminist Frequency channel, but only a few thousand people watch her videos. McIntosh, on the other hand, survived. After leaving Feminist Frequency, he started his own channel, called Pop Culture Detective, and his criticisms are quite popular. He is one of the biggest SJW channels. I've watched a couple of his videos and didn't feel an urge to react to them. I didn't find them to be offensive like the Feminist Frequency videos were. McIntosh has learned his lesson, and found a way to make his points in a more civil manner, so I just ignored him. But recently he popped on my radar again, when he got involved in a cultural battle that I am following, the battle for the soul of Star Wars. McIntosh made a lengthy Twitter thread, defending The Last Jedi from those who claim that it is untrue to the spirit of the earlier movies. And his thread was acknowledged by none other than Rian Johnson, the director of The Last Jedi, who, apparently without knowing who McIntosh is, endorsed it, and indicated that it helped him understand where his critics are wrong. Yes folks, that's right. As if Rian Johnson wasn't deep enough in shit already, he just committed one of the internet's cardinal sins, and went full McIntosh. You never go full McIntosh. I sympathize with Johnson. He is currently dealing with a terrifying thought, the thought that he will go down in history as the man who destroyed Star Wars, and this is not a happy place to be in. So he is grasping at any straw, anyone who defends his movie. Some of the defenses provided for The Last Jedi were good, but McIntosh's isn't one of them. In fact, it is terrible, and Johnson only hurt himself by endorsing it. What it did do, however, is make me want to take a closer look at McIntosh's work, and when I did, I realized that there is still enough juice in it for me to stick my fangs into. So now, I am going to criticize that McIntosh thread and show how wrong he is. And then, we will have a look at one of his Pop Culture Detective videos, a video about Star Wars, and see just how deep his misconceptions go, and what that says about his brand of feminism. But first, let's go through his thread, shall we? A handful of The Last Jedi haters in my mentions are offering up a fascinating misreading of the final showdown between Luke and Vader in Return of the Jedi. I think it's worth taking a moment to discuss because it may help explain why these guys hate Luke's character so much in Episode 8. The misreading? Luke Skywalker uses his great warrior skills to defeat Darth Vader. Once he proves himself in combat and stands victorious, Luke does the honorable thing by showing mercy and sparing his enemy, thereby saving himself from corruption and redeeming his father. What really happened? Luke tries to avoid fighting but gives in to anger. As he bests Vader in combat, Luke realizes his great mistake. Winning this fight means losing his soul to the dark side. The battle itself is corrupting him. Understanding this, Luke throws away his weapon. Notice that the misreading above reframes Luke as a badass warrior, and reframes his refusal to kill Vader as an act of mercy stemming from his position of power. This is significant because Luke beating Vader in combat is explicitly depicted as a moment of weakness, not strength. The desire of some fans to reimagine Luke as a powerful warrior who spares the bad guy out of benevolence is consistent with the way male heroes are often represented. It's the way Batman is framed when he doesn't kill the Joker. But Luke Skywalker isn't a typical action hero. Luke's arc in the original trilogy ends with him not only refusing to kill the bad guy, but refusing to even fight a worse villain. This is why Luke's force projection standoff with Kylo in The Last Jedi is so perfect. It's the ultimate expression of everything Luke has learned. The fact that an iconic figure like Luke Skywalker was explicitly framed as weak for fighting a murderous villain like Darth Vader is a pretty subversive message, especially for a male hero in Hollywood. And it's something that, 35 years later, some fans still refuse to accept. So, what McIntosh is saying here is this: violence leads to the dark side. Therefore, if Luke fights, he opens himself up to the dark side's influence. He knows this, and he tries to avoid fighting Vader, but Vader gets him to lose control and turn to violence. He defeats his father, and stands on the edge of the dark side, but catches himself in the last minute and goes back to a non-violent mode. This is the lesson he learned here, and this is the lesson he applies in The Last Jedi, as he does not fight Kylo Ren. But the disgruntled fans misread what happened in Return of the Jedi, and thought that we saw Luke being a great warrior and defeating Vader, and then sparing him out of mercy. They saw his turning to violence as a manifestation of strength, not weakness. That's why they can't accept his pacifist stance in The Last Jedi. I agree that Luke's outburst in attacking Vader is depicted as a moment of weakness, and I'm pretty sure that most Star Wars fans see it that way, although there are probably a few who, like McIntosh claims, think that Luke is being a triumphant badass. But McIntosh, and Rian Johnson after him, is trying to extrapolate from these few and portray all the critics as having that misconception. And some in the SJW media have picked that up and tried to run with it. So it's incumbent upon us to show why they are wrong. Let me start by going back to something I tweeted after I saw The Last Jedi. I didn't hate the movie. A lot of it was crap, but I thought that there were a couple of interesting things in it. One of them is Luke Skywalker's arc, which I, too, thought that the angry fans are getting wrong. So I made a couple of tweets about it. The first tweet read, "People have complained that The Last Jedi is an SJW movie." I didn't get much of that vibe. The vibe I got from the movie was a Buddhist vibe. And I added to that a second tweet. Many have interpreted what happened to Luke at the end as the result of his fight with Kylo Ren. I don't think it had anything to do with it. I think he reached nirvana. Now when I say Buddhist, I don't mean literally Buddhist. I mean Buddhist in spirit. I think what the movie is trying to tell us is this: the Force is a oneness, and all beings come from that oneness. If we all gave up on our individuality, and just learned to flow along with the Force, there will be peace. If you are really good at it, you can even dissolve into the Force and maintain your consciousness in it, like some Jedi do. So evil, according to this movie, does not stem only from selfish individualism. It stems from individualism itself, since individualism differentiates you from the Force. That is why all the acts of heroism that the characters perform throughout the movie turn out to be futile. The only act that helps is an act of self-sacrifice, a totally selfless act. And even with self-sacrifice, it can be good only if it is completely selfless. The movie shows Holdo's self-sacrifice in a positive light, and Finn's self-sacrifice in a negative light. Why? Because in Finn's act there is still a part of himself. Along with saving his friends, he also does it to get revenge against the First Order. It's notable that the former is a woman and the latter a man. The movie seems to indicate that women are superior to men, because for them selflessness comes naturally, whereas men have to learn it. But let's stay focused on the Buddhist element. Now I think that the metaphysics that George Lucas created do lend themselves to this quasi-Buddhist story, and I thought that Johnson made an interesting choice when he went in that direction. But as I kept on following the drama around the movie, I realized that I am missing something, because I am not a Star Wars fan. For the fans, Luke Skywalker was a hero, a role model that they looked up to. As someone who is creating within an established universe, Rian Johnson did not have the ethical license to change the essence of this character too much. Johnson himself, in some of his tweets, claimed that he believes that he remained true to Luke's character, and this is obviously why he also embraced McIntosh's interpretation. So, let's now ask, is Johnson's Luke true to Lucas's Luke? Absolutely not, because in Lucas's original trilogy, the heroes are individualists. Luke is not selfless. He regards living beings as distinct individuals, and fights so they can maintain their individual freedom. He is taught the Jedi philosophy of selflessness, but he never fully commits to it. He sometimes performs selfless acts, but never transcends himself entirely, which is what a Buddhist would try to do. When he refuses to kill Vader, it is not an act of selflessness, it is an act of self-control. It is Luke imposing his good side over his bad side, after the latter took control for a moment. And yes, it is also an act of self-sacrifice, allowing the Emperor to kill him, but this is done as a tactic, a desperate attempt to win after all other ways failed. This is the hero that millions of Star Wars fans idolize, a man who wins because he imposes his will over his dark side. Not, as McIntosh so condescendingly thinks of them, because he shows mercy to his defeated enemy. And this is the hero that Rian Johnson has demolished, when he made Luke into someone who runs away from the fight. Johnson has essentially turned Luke into a hermit, like some monks. But the inspiration for the Jedi was not Buddhist monks. The inspiration for the Jedi was the samurai. The samurai were usually Buddhists, and they were indeed supposed to be selfless. But along with their selflessness, they also had purpose. They served the cause, and they learned to be selfless so they could totally commit themselves to that cause. The cause of the Jedi is to protect the Republic and maintain peace and order in the galaxy, and Luke had run away from it. He did it, he says, because he came to the conclusion that the power of the Jedi can only lead to bad. And this is diametrically opposed to the message of Return of the Jedi, where we saw the hero using his power to overcome the dark. Let's go back to Jonathan McIntosh's tweets. Apparently, he believes that Luke's weakness was in the act of turning to violence. Actually, the violence itself isn't the problem. As long as the violence is done out of love, out of wanting to defend people from oppression, it is heroic and positive. The moment of weakness was when Luke started to fight out of anger and hate, and that is what we are supposed to see as negative. McIntosh, as usual, misses the point. Okay, Johnson's defenders might say, but decades have passed since then. Luke has realized that the Force is dangerous, and decided to become a hermit and remove himself from the battlefield, just like some samurai became Buddhist monks. Well, sure, I can see that happening in feudal Japan, where samurai swords were the most lethal weapon. But is mass pacifism an option for a hero in a universe where Death Star technology exists? Billions of people have died by the hands of the First Order, deaths that might have been avoided if Luke Skywalker, the most powerful warrior in the galaxy, didn't abandon his post. Choosing this path has completely tarnished Luke's image. Let's take a real-life case of Buddhist pacifism in the face of brutal tyranny. Mahatma Gandhi was known for preaching non-violent struggle, and for the successes his way had when his people applied it to oppose British rule in India. But another force working in the world at the time was Nazi Germany, and here Gandhi's non-violent stance was challenged. Gandhi considered the Nazis to be a monstrosity, and yet he opposed violent struggle even against them. Instead, he wrote personal letters to Hitler, trying to get him to see the error of his ways. He also wrote an open letter to the British people, advising them to not fight the Nazis, because fighting and killing is worse than being conquered and subjugated. And in 1938 he wrote an open letter to German Jews, advising them to not accept their persecution, but to oppose it non-violently. He acknowledged that this will probably lead to them being mass murdered by the Nazis. But, he wrote, even the massacre I have imagined could be turned into a day of thanksgiving, and joy that Jehovah had wrought deliverance on the race even at the hand of the tyrant. For to the God-fearing, death has no terror. It is a joyful sleep to be followed by a waking that will be all the more refreshing for the long sleep. Now, in Indian culture, where Buddha and Gandhi operated, this makes sense. Since it considers your life as an individual on earth as something that you should aspire to transcend, we can see why Gandhi would think that this is the best option. The Jedi actually have a very similar view, as expressed by Yoda.
Death is a natural part of life. Rejoice for those around you who transform into the Force.
But Luke does not accept this view.
You must not go.
But Han and Leia will die if I don't.
Patience.
And sacrifice Han and Leia.
If you honor what they fight for, yes.
R2, fire up the converters.
And Luke does not accept this view because he is a product of Western culture, where it makes no sense. And since most of the people idolizing Luke are also part of this culture, it is wrong to demand of them to accept their hero going down this path. They are not Hindus, Luke was never a Buddhist, and in that context, his pacifism constitutes a criminal dereliction of duty. Luke was supposed to bring balance to the Force, not leave it in darkness. This is what I had to say about McIntosh's tweets. Now, let's have a look at his video. The video titled The Case Against the Jedi Order was released in the last day of 2017, strategically coinciding with the release of The Last Jedi earlier that month. McIntosh, however, isn't dealing with the Disney Star Wars movies, but focuses on the two trilogies made by George Lucas. At first glance, you already see why his current videos are better received than the Feminist Frequency videos. As you may recall, the main project of that channel was a series called Tropes vs. Women in Video Games, which aimed to show how video games condition gamers to be violent and oppressive towards women. And yet, in the entire series, Anita Sarkeesian fails to show even a single case in which a video game advocates violence against women. Instead, she makes assumptions about how the male gamers are affected by these games, assumptions that are based on her perception of what the nature of men is. And her perception of the nature of men is rabidly hateful, to the point where she basically dehumanizes them. We find none of that in this video. McIntosh is focusing on the pop culture artifact he is criticizing, and he is actually talking about the problems of men, and how culture might exacerbate them. This is a more humane approach. But once you start to get into what he is saying, you see that he is still in full McIntosh mode. In the beginning of the video, McIntosh characterizes the Lucas Star Wars trilogies as coming-of-age stories, and I agree. He then points out that Luke's and Anakin's growth is being guided and shaped by the principles of the Jedi. Then, he says this.
But buried within those principles, we find some troubling and deeply unhealthy ideas about Stoic masculinity.
When McIntosh uses the word Stoic here, he does it in the colloquial sense. However, I shall take this opportunity to provide a brief overview of Stoicism, because it will be relevant later. Stoicism is a school of thought that was founded in Athens in the 3rd century BC, but reached its height in Rome in the first 2 centuries AD. The Stoic philosophers believe that happiness is achieved when we live according to our nature. The essence of humans is rationality, so to live according to our nature, we must develop our mind through philosophical thought. We should accept the irrational side of our nature as well, but use our mind to shape it and direct it towards a virtuous life. We must not be enslaved to urges, passions, and drives, but learn to control them. We must also understand that we are part of a teleological universe, and thus rationalize every bad thing that happens, and learn to see it as necessary and therefore good. Once you achieve this state of mind, you become free and happy, no matter what situation you are in. Some Stoics were slaves, but with the Stoic thought, they claimed that they achieved spiritual freedom, peace of mind, and happiness. The Stoic thought was highly influential on the development of Western culture, and was one of the forces that took it out of its savage origins and turned it into a civilization that tries to use reason to devise a better world for itself. The human ape, once an animal driven mainly by base urges, was transformed by this civilizing process into an animal that lives in a world of increasing peace, prosperity, and well-being. But Jonathan McIntosh characterizes Stoicism as a bad thing, part of the dark side. Let's follow his reasoning. McIntosh begins by describing the Jedi Order. He completely disregards the quasi-Buddhist nature of its philosophy and focuses mainly on the fact that it is male-dominated. he acknowledges that the Jedi present a welcomed alternative to the usual male movie hero, in that they are not daredevils who rely on physical strength, but rather deliberate and peace-seeking monks who rely on intelligence and dexterity. However,
but even though the Jedi are in some ways presented as different from the expected Hollywood fare, that doesn't necessarily mean they represent a positive version of masculinity.
So, while the tweets we saw earlier defended Star Wars as presenting a better version of masculinity than regular Hollywood movies, here McIntosh tells us that even this is not good enough. He then points out that the Jedi, according to Lucas, are influenced by the lawmen in Hollywood westerns, and says,
like the upstanding lawmen from classic westerns, the Jedi are framed as rugged, stoic warriors who bring order to a lawless land. But the real heart of Jedi dogma, the teachings that are given the most importance, have to do with emotions. In Star Wars, a Jedi's worst enemies are not agents of the dark side. His true enemies are his own emotions.
So, here's the problem. McIntosh characterizes Jedi masculinity as stoic masculinity, in which the hero is demanded to repress his emotions, which, as we shall see, he regards as a bad practice. But let's talk first about the claim itself. Is McIntosh right that the Jedi are Stoics? No, he once again misses the point. He gets slightly closer to the mark a bit later, when he says,
young Jedi are instructed to sever all close emotional connections to the people they care about. They must learn to hide their feelings from others, to deny their emotional selves, and to always present a stoic exterior to the world.
No, Jonathan, not to deny their emotional selves, to deny their selves. A Jedi is actually encouraged to be connected to his emotions. What he is not supposed to have is a self. A Jedi is supposed to be completely selfless. And when I say selfless, I don't mean it in the Western sense, where it means momentarily transcending the self to perform an altruistic act. I mean it in the Eastern sense, where the self is basically seen as the root of all evil, and the aspiration is to permanently transcend it. For the Jedi, emotions are bad only if they tie you to your own self, prevent you from letting it go. And that is why they are completely different from the Stoics, which emphasize individual freedom, and preach that the self should be in control of the emotions. The Jedi, as we said already, are much closer to Buddhism. McIntosh doesn't get that, and so he misrepresents what happens when young Anakin is brought before the Jedi Council to determine whether he should be trained. Usually, potential Jedi are detected at an earlier age, before they had time to develop strong emotional ties to other people. Anakin, however, is already deeply connected to his mother, and the Jedi observe this as something that will prevent him from transcending himself. That's why they initially reject him. McIntosh misses that, so he characterizes it thus.
Long before he donned the mask of Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker is instructed to wear another mask, a mask of emotional invulnerability. When he's presented to the Jedi Council, he's soundly rejected. And the reason that Yoda gives for rejecting this 9-year-old boy is because he's too emotional. And why is he deemed too emotional? Well, it's because he admits that he misses his mother. I want to underscore the message being presented here. Anakin's feelings of pain and loss are understandable and completely normal. But instead of getting the emotional support that he so desperately needs, this child is instead publicly shamed for expressing his feelings of grief and sadness.
To remind you, the Jedi are not counselors for child health. They are an order, and Anakin wants to join this order. They are not forcing him to do anything. He can give up on his ambition to become a Jedi and go tend to his feelings. But they are telling him what is needed to become a member, and why he is unfit. McIntosh, however, makes it seem like this is something that all children in the society have to go through, that they are all told to detach from their emotions. Of course, he is talking about our society. To strengthen his point, McIntosh says that,
but they're also sternly warned to always keep their emotions buried deep inside.
Bury your feelings deep down, Luke.
Wrong. A true Jedi does not have to bury his emotions, because he has no selfish emotions. Luke, however, did not receive full training, and does have selfish emotions. That makes him vulnerable to Vader's manipulations, and that is why he is advised to at least bury his feelings and hide them.
To be clear, Jedi Masters don't push Stoicism on boys to be cruel or malicious.
Truly wonderful the mind of a child is.
They, like many well-meaning people in the real world, firmly believe that boys need to disassociate from their feelings and learn to tough it out in silence. But regardless of the intentions, leaving young men emotionally abandoned is psychologically damaging and extremely unhealthy.
Here we get to the point. After misrepresenting the Jedi, McIntosh now uses them as a manifestation of Western culture. He characterizes it as a culture that trains men to bury their feelings, to detach from their emotional selves. The result, he says, is harmful to boys and men. We now carry on with Anakin's story. The Jedi have decided to gamble, and train him after all, hoping he can overcome his problematic starting point. But the teenage Anakin, after failing to become completely selfless as a Jedi should, is being torn apart because of his personal feelings towards his mother and towards Padme. McIntosh, tied to his narrow Western-centric view, still has it backwards. He still sees the Jedi as individualists, like the Stoics.
Anakin still isn't getting the emotional support that he needs.
I don't know why I keep dreaming about her.
Instead, he's just meant to put his mother's suffering out of his mind.
Dreams pass in time.
As a Jedi in training, he must strive to become an autonomous, detached, emotional island.
We see how McIntosh's misreading leads him astray. He doesn't see Anakin as someone who is failing the Jedi doctrine of transcending the self, but as someone who is failing the allegedly Jedi doctrine of detaching from his emotional self. And he claims that George Lucas is trying to tell us that this is Anakin's failure to become a man. He shows that when Anakin expresses grief, or shows fear, or allows himself to love Padme, it is characterized as a negative thing. This, he claims, is because we are trained to believe that such displays of emotion are unmasculine. We shall soon discuss whether or not McIntosh is right, and this is indeed what our society trains men to do. But one thing is for sure, he completely misunderstands the story of Star Wars. McIntosh is right about one thing. The Jedi do indeed handle Anakin's problems badly. But that, of course, is the story. Lucas shows us that the Jedi, because they are selfless, are incapable of understanding what Anakin is going through, and completely fail to provide him with the help and counseling he needs. Because Lucas, as we shall discuss, does not think that Jedi philosophy is what our social order should be based on. McIntosh, once again, misses the point. And he misses the point yet again when he tries to understand Jedi philosophy.
And that's because Jedi philosophy is constructed around what I'd call an emotional domino theory.
Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
Setting aside George Lucas's misappropriation of some spiritual concepts that originate in Asia,
this offhand remark shows how hilariously wrong he gets it. It shows that McIntosh doesn't recognize that the entire Jedi philosophy is inspired by Eastern thought. He thinks that Lucas is just using Eastern concepts when convenient.
That formula is incredibly reductive, and also not how emotions work.
What?
Being afraid is not a slippery slope to all-consuming evil. And yet this emotional domino effect theory is core to the Jedi belief system. They believe that young men are inherently volatile, and if they succumb to one intense emotion, it will spark an inevitable chain reaction that leads to hatred. So let's see if we can untangle some of the twisted logic here. Even though Yoda starts his bizarre equation with fear, that's not the first domino in the chain.
Correct.
The fear of loss is a path to the dark side.
Notice that he's warning about fear of loss, which he says stems from emotional attachments to other people. This is why the Jedi Order expressly forbids romance and prohibits its members from having families. Just so we're clear on what that means, according to the Jedi, it's loving relationships with another person that leads men down the path to evil.
So, according to McIntosh, The first domino is the loving relationship with another person. That leads to fear of loss, etc. But, as we've determined, this is a misreading. The first domino is maintaining a sense of self. Having a loving relationship, where you are loved for who you are as an individual person, is merely part of it. McIntosh mischaracterizes it, and, based on that,
although the Jedi caution against emotional attachments in general, it's close relationships with women in particular that are framed as the most dangerous. This is made especially evident in the prequels, where emotional bonds with women are framed as something that eats away at a man's sanity, and, indirectly, drives men to fits of uncontrollable rage. By the end of Episode 3, it's been made abundantly clear that Anakin turns into Darth Vader because he's unable to suppress his love for the women in his life. Embedded in that plot point is a toxic idea, that emotional intimacy and connection with women represents a loss of control for men. And that message, that women are the catalyst for men's loss of control, is part of a deeply sexist worldview. It's an especially pernicious myth because it fosters resentment towards women and also encourages men to view healthy expressions of emotional intimacy with suspicion.
And here we have the full McIntosh. Society, according to Jonathan, is teaching us that women are bad for men, because society is inherently sexist. And so, men are taught to fear and suspect women, and that to be masculine means that you must not allow yourself to love them. According to McIntosh's own emotional domino theory, this is the first domino in what leads men to detach from their emotions altogether.
And the narrative lessons for both protagonists closely mirror hypermasculine socialization in the real world. Men and boys are taught to hide their feelings because, we are told, expressing vulnerability demonstrates weakness. And leaves them open to being manipulated or dominated by their rivals.
And this domino effect eventually leads to men lashing out at the world and becoming aggressive and hateful. As a result, women suffer the aggression of men, and men suffer the psychological pain of being emotionally damaged. Everyone is suffering, and it's all because of systemic sexism. To counteract, allow me to present a very brief overview of the history of masculinity in Western civilization. Humans evolved from the apes, which means that they have certain natural drives, such as aggression and dominance. This nature cannot be changed, but what humans can and have changed is their second nature, the way they act on these natural impulses. In the early days of human civilization, which were much more violent than today, masculinity was expressed through physical prowess. But as social order gradually took over, humans had to learn to subdue their violent impulses. The Greeks were ahead of everyone, and taught their men how to control their drives and passions in order to become virtuous, a process that reached its apotheosis in the teachings of the Stoics. These teachings then spread, and became one of the cornerstones of Western culture. From here on, men were taught that a real man is someone who controls his drives and passions, and doesn't allow them to take over. This had several manifestations. The noble class made the teachings of the Stoics part of what it means to be a nobleman, and as the courtly society began to emerge in the late Middle Ages, this led to the rise of the concept of the gentleman, someone who is above the brutish nature of man. By the 18th century, this resulted in an extremely genteel masculinity, which by today's standards looks effeminate. Christianity, meanwhile, also absorbed Stoic thought, as part of its teachings of how to become a peace-loving Christian person. In the case of Christianity, however, control often became repression. Since Christianity regards certain drives and passions as coming from the devil, men were taught not just to control them, but to try to get rid of them altogether. This is impossible, so these impulses became repressed. The common folk, in the meantime, remained quite brutish and violent, but as the modern state emerged in the 19th century, and the ambition was to overcome the old class system, the idea was that every man should become a gentleman. In the Victorian age, this meant that every child was taught to behave in a civilized manner, a combination of aristocratic decorum and Christian self-repression. For many working-class people, however, this felt like oppression, especially since it wasn't really suitable for the harsher reality that they lived in. The result was that they rebelled and accentuated their masculinity, making it more tough and dominant. This tougher masculinity started to rule the streets, and it was also used by some organizations populated mainly by working-class people, such as the army or sports teams, which encouraged it and directed it to their means. There were other opposing forces. The Romantic artists emphasized feelings, rebelling against Victorian Stoicism, while the psychoanalysts claimed that the stiff upper lip of the Victorians, the repression of emotions, is psychologically damaging. At the same time, we need to remember that the world was changing. In the modern age, with the advancement of technology, reality became increasingly more comfortable and peaceful. The all-masculine toughness, necessary to deal with the harsh world, could gradually give way to softer types of masculinity. In the modern world, masculinity is always in flux, re-evaluating and redefining itself, to find the right balance for the time. This was a highly simplistic history of masculinity, but what I wanted to emphasize here is how complicated the issue is. Masculinity is basically the second nature of men, the thing by which they subdue the ape inside, so they are not harmful to the society around them, especially to women. It is a constant struggle to tame the wild beast, and it is made harder because of these complexities. There are many opposing forces that comprise masculinity, many different traditions, and masculinity is demanded to always find the right balance between them, as well as adjusting for the culture and the time that it is in. For many men, indeed, finding the right balance proves to be too hard, and they suffer as a result. McIntosh is right about that, but he completely ignores all of these complexities, and, as usual, makes it seem like the whole issue hinges on just one thing that we should fix. This is not how you should approach such an issue. In the next part of the video, McIntosh talks about why Anakin turned to evil while Luke became a hero, despite the fact that both of them were subjected to Jedi teachings.
Like Anakin, Luke's Jedi training includes the demand that he bury his emotions, sever his attachments, and abandon his friends. And like Anakin, Luke doesn't always follow the instructions of his teachers. The difference is that unlike his father, Luke doesn't take the Jedi orthodoxy surrounding emotional detachment to heart. When you really think about it, Luke Skywalker is at his very best when he doesn't follow the path of the Jedi. The belief that emotional disconnection is an essential step for boys on their journey into manhood is a common one. But following that path leads to a life of loneliness, emotional dysfunction, and anger. In the end, it's the Jedi and their philosophy of emotional detachment that's ultimately responsible for the creation of Darth Vader.
You don't say, Jonathan. Have you considered that maybe this is what Lucas was trying to tell us? If we strip away the space opera stuff, the story of Star Wars is a story that we have seen in Hollywood movies before. It is a story of an American who joins an Eastern martial arts cult, and excels because he refuses to fully internalize the Eastern philosophy of selflessness, instead bringing his American individualism into the mix. Anakin fails because he fails to find the right balance, and the Jedi fail because they are ill-equipped to properly deal with what he is going through. The Lucas Star Wars movies are an indictment of the shortcomings of Jedi philosophy, and, indirectly, of the shortcomings of Buddhism. In the comment section of the video, several commenters have made that point, and their comments got a lot of upvotes, showing that many Star Wars fans do get it. McIntosh's response to that was that if you watch Lucas talking about it, you see that he truly believes in Yoda's philosophy. Well, let's have a look, shall we?
And when you want stuff and you get stuff, then you are afraid somebody's going to take it away from you. Whether it's a person or a thing or a particular pleasure, experience. Once you become afraid that somebody's going to take it away from you, or you're going to lose it, then you start to become angry, especially if you're losing it. And that anger leads to hate. And hate leads to suffering.
So it appears that McIntosh is right, and Lucas does truly believe in the emotional domino theory that he put in Yoda's mouth. But what does Lucas say just before that?
the core of the Force. I mean, you got the dark side, the light side. One is selfless, one is selfish. And you want to keep them in balance. What happens when you go to the dark side is it goes out of balance, and then you get really selfish and you forget about everybody, and you ultimately lead yourself, because when you get selfish, you get stuff, or you want stuff. And when you want stuff and you get stuff, then you are afraid somebody's going to take it away from you.
So, it has nothing to do with emotional detachment. The issue here is finding the right balance between selflessness and selfishness. When you are too selfish, that is the first domino in the chain, the one that leads you down the emotional path that ends in suffering. This was Anakin's failure. When you are too selfless, you are basically a good person, but you are unable to understand and help people who aren't as selfless as you are. This was the Jedi's failure. Luke is the one who represents the right balance. And this is where Rian Johnson failed. The fans were expecting Luke to be the one who brings the new balance to the Force, the one who creates a new and better Jedi Order, which combines selflessness and individualism. Instead, Johnson seems to think that Buddhism is the right answer, and created a movie that is Buddhist in spirit. The Luke storyline here is that he lost his faith, until Rey comes and rekindles it, bringing him back to himself. But when Johnson shows Luke returning to himself, it isn't the Luke that Lucas created. It is a Buddhist Luke, one that has become as selfless as the Jedi were. We are almost at the end of McIntosh's video. Is there anything else you wish to tell us, Jonathan?
I hope you enjoyed that video. These essays take an enormous amount of time to produce. That one took about 3 months all told. So if you like these long-form video essays, please consider going over to Patreon and helping to fund the project there.
3 months? Doing what? You are just talking over Star Wars clips. I bet any content creator watching this is laughing their ass off right now. This video is more than twice as long. It has more editing. I had to re-watch the prequels and reread the Stoics, and read that book that you recommended. That, along with the writing, recording and editing, took me about 2 weeks. And that's while doing my daytime job. And I'm considered slow. I guess maybe McIntosh needs more time because he must have long sessions of connecting to his feelings before every paragraph that he formulates, or something. Let's recap. Jonathan McIntosh believes that Western society sees emotional detachment as an important part of masculinity. Because of that, it teaches young boys to detach from their emotions, as part of the process of becoming a man. This creates deep psychological complications, denying men the ability to love, or to express important emotions like fear and grief. Since they are afraid to lose their masculinity, men bottle up their emotions, and as a result they become angry and violent. He claims that popular culture plays a part in this programming of men. Towards the end of the video, he even calls upon men to rebel and change the culture. But when he gets down to providing an example for this process, he fails miserably. His interpretation of the Star Wars movies misses the point by 12 million parsecs, and only ends up showing how wrong his entire theory is.
Jedi philosophy gets it entirely backwards. Emotional detachment doesn't prevent men from turning to the dark side. Emotional detachment is the cause of men turning to the dark side.
No, Jonathan. It is you who has it backwards. Our society doesn't teach that masculinity means emotional detachment. It teaches that masculinity, among other things, requires emotional control. Men are allowed to express any feeling that they have. What they are not supposed to do is let their feelings overcome them, to the point where they lose control. And that is because a man who is out of control is dangerous to those around him, since he is physically strong enough to cause serious damage. That is why loss of control over your emotions is usually depicted as a weakness in popular culture, including in Star Wars. Emotional detachment, in our culture, is seen as a negative thing. We believe that it is bad for men to bottle up their emotions. But a lot of men, for all sorts of reasons, end up emotionally detached. Many times the fault is indeed at the feet of masculinity, that is taken too far, either by the individual himself or by the men around him. It is a complicated problem that requires thoughtful and sensitive handling, but when you mischaracterize it in the way that McIntosh does, you will only cause damage. You might wonder where McIntosh gets his misguided ideas on masculinity from. Well, we really don't need to look far to find the answer. He tells us himself. At several points in the video, McIntosh turns to get advice from his own Master Yoda.
Author Bell Hooks describes this emotional hardening process in a book I highly recommend entitled The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity, and Love.
So, Johnny Mac recommends that I read Bell Hooks, the renowned radical feminist. I never read her before, so this was a good opportunity to see what the fuss is about. So I downloaded the book he recommended, a 2004 publication called The Will to Change. I read it, and, I must admit, it was illuminating. The premise of the book is that feminists should acknowledge that men are also hurting in Western society, and offer a new type of masculinity, one that will make men happier. Hooks admonishes what she calls the man-hating feminists, who see men as the enemy. She says that this kind of feminism is outdated. The new feminism regards all of us, men and women, as victims of the system, a system which she calls the patriarchy. The patriarchy is imposing on men a form of masculinity which is bad for their psychological well-being, and makes them hurt the women in their lives. So, instead of fighting against men, the new feminism fights to bring down the patriarchy, a revolution which will benefit men as well. So radical feminists actually love men. But Hooks says that they have failed to deal with the sufferings of men in everyday life, and show this love. This is what this book aims to fix. But as I read into this book, I realized that there's something very important missing in it. Men themselves. It does, of course, talk mainly about men, but it doesn't give them the chance to present their own story. That story that I told above, in which masculinity has evolved out of man's attempt to subdue the beast inside and become civilized, is brushed aside. The attitude towards women, of course, is an important part of this story. When the world was a harsher place, men were the ones who took the hard mantle of work, war, and politics, and tried to shield women and children from these things. This resulted in the development of traditions that placed men in charge. As the world became a more comfortable place, women could get more involved in the spheres that belonged to men, and the balance of power changed. In the liberal society, we believe that there should be gender equality, and we work to get rid of patriarchal traditions. It is part of the ongoing process of creating a more enlightened masculinity. None of this is present in Hooks' book. There is no acknowledgement of the millennia of texts which document the evolution of masculinity, and how it was primarily a story of sublimation. She just gives her own description of the masculinity of today, and acts as if this is what masculinity has always been. And this is because Hooks is a feminist creationist. She does not believe in evolution, in the process by which the human ape has become more civilized. Instead, she believes that today's humans are the result of a single act of creation, sometime in a distant past, which has created the patriarchy that shapes our consciousness. It was created by men, and the men of today carry that original sin with them, and as long as they don't acknowledge it and bring it down, they share the guilt. Hooks pretends that her brand of feminism isn't hateful like that of the feminists she calls man-haters, but actually, it has taken their hate and ratcheted it up to a new level, implicating all men in the crime of violence against women. And the fact that she disguises it with pretensions of love just makes it all the more insidious. Hooks rejects the notion that male violence stems from natural human urges which men need to control, and that patriarchal attitudes displayed by men are remnants of past traditions, which the liberal society is trying to overcome. She admonishes those scholars who provide such interpretations, and blames them for not having the courage to acknowledge the patriarchy. The patriarchy, as she defines it, is a socio-political system that insists that males are inherently dominating, and endowed with the right to dominate and rule over the weak, and to maintain that dominance through various forms of psychological terrorism and violence. What evidence does she provide to substantiate the claim that such a patriarchy exists? Virtually none. Mostly, she relies on the words of male feminists, who share her ideology. Sometimes she provides testimonies from other men, but these testimonies can easily be explained by the liberal model. Hooks, however, spins their words to make it seem like they have been conditioned by the system to be dominating and violent towards women. Apart from that, she doesn't bother to provide any evidence. She just says that feminists have debunked the old notions that non-feminists rely on. But even then, she exposes the weakness of her arguments. In the beginning of chapter 4, she asserts that it has been shown that there are cultures in the world in which rape is rare, proving that men are not violent by nature. But this is a failed argument. If rape is rare, it means that it still exists. All that the existence of such cultures shows is that they have done a better job at training men's second nature. But Hooks thinks that she proved that violence is a learned thing, not a natural impulse. Therefore, the fact that men are told to control their emotions isn't designed to make them less violent. The way Hooks tells it, it is designed to make them less caring, so that they can be better dominators. After she effectively erases the independent voice of men, Hooks proceeds to dehumanize them. In the first chapter she declares that men are incapable of love, because Western society forbids them to love and express love. This is a truly baffling claim, since for the past 2 millennia, at least, Western culture has regarded love as the most divine thing, and male artists have expressed love in every possible way. Now, if the argument was that men's emotional repression is stifling them from expressing their love, then we could have a conversation. But Hooks deals in absolutes. She defines men who live within patriarchy as incapable of loving, and thus removes them from the conversation about love, leaving women as the sole authority. She continues to dehumanize men throughout the book. Patriarchy, she claims, is teaching men that in order to be masculine they should dominate women, they should feel no pain, they should express no emotion except anger, they should constantly crave sex, they should fear and hate women, and more. She acknowledges that not all men act in this way, but claims that this is because they resist the patriarchy. Or she provides some psychobabble to show that their good behavior is actually an expression of their inner hate. She also admits that many women behave in the ways she ascribes to men, but blames this too on the patriarchy. As a man, I could recognize very little of what Hooks calls masculinity in myself or in most of the men I know. Impulses of violence and domination have been in me since I was a little boy, and the socializing process is actually the thing that made me sublimate them. And I could recognize some of it in the masculinity of old, but we have progressed since then. For Hooks, however, the patriarchy is a constant fact, and any progress is just on the surface, while inside men remain the same. So she has no problem relying on examples from the past, and treating them as if they are still relevant today. After she debases men in such a way, Hooks can offer feminism as the cure. In chapter 7, she presents an alternative masculinity, one that she claims will make men happier and better. The alternative she offers is partly what masculinity already is today, and partly can work only if her creationist beliefs are true. But she presents it as a radical alternative, something that men will have to work hard to achieve. The first step, of course, is to accept feminism and overthrow the patriarchy. In other words, she doesn't want to help men find a way to become better. They are in such a debased state that they are incapable of becoming better on their own. She wants men to submit to her, so she can reprogram them. This rhetoric is quite familiar to anyone who knows a bit about the history of antisemitism. In the Middle Ages, Christianity and Islam portrayed the Jew as a wretched being, and kept Jews in a wretched state. In both cases the attempt was to get the Jews to convert, but Christianity also couched it in the language of love. We don't hate the Jew, we love the Jew and want to save him. As Western culture progressed, we realized that this is not love, this is hate. You'd expect us to outgrow this medieval logic by now, and yet here it is, embedded in 21st century feminism. The pretension of the book is to show greater understanding of men, but there is no honest attempt at understanding here. It is actually an attempt to monopolize the discussion of men's issues, make feminism the only solution, while silencing any other idea. This is hardly surprising when you remember that Bell Hooks is also one of the main proponents of intersectional feminism, which is, at heart, a power play by black feminists. Intersectional feminism presumes to interlink all the different oppressed groups, and create an ideology that acknowledges the problems of all of them. But remember that in radical feminism, the solution to the problem is always to bring down the oppressive system. So actually, what intersectional feminism does is to interlink the oppressors, and the result is that ultimately it all comes down to just one oppressor, what Hooks calls the imperialist white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. Every other oppressor is linked and dependent on this one oppressor, so if you bring it down, they will fall as well. That's why intersectional feminists hardly bother to fight for oppressed groups in third world countries. They believe that it will work itself out once you bring down the imperialist white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. This is also why white women are slowly being nudged out of the movement, since they are part of the white supremacy. Again, it is an ideology of hate and exclusion that disguises itself as love and inclusion. In Chapter 6, Hooks provides a critique of capitalism, and quite an effective one at that. She talks about how capitalist society conditions us to find our self-worth in work, but since it fails to deliver satisfying jobs for everyone, many men feel worthless. She also talks about how working too hard prevents men from developing spiritually and emotionally. I think these are valid criticisms. The problem is, she doesn't call it capitalism. She calls it imperialist white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. And so, instead of thinking of how to fix capitalism, the solution she offers is to bring down the patriarchy. Once again, intersectional feminism shows that its true goal is to sideline any other human concern, and direct everything and everyone against its own perceived enemy. The bottom line is that you can't transcend hate if you believe in the myth of the patriarchy. You have a choice between two models. One sees today's Western society as a liberal society which strives to achieve equality and freedom for all, and works to eliminate patriarchal traditions. The other sees today's Western society as a patriarchy, which is designed to maintain the domination of men over women. The former assumes goodwill on the part of men, the latter assumes that they have bad will. So if you choose to adopt the latter, you choose to hate men. Hooks might be honest in her attempt to overcome the hate, but she fails badly. She does a pretty good job of disguising it, from herself and others, with the pseudo-loving language that she uses. But the problem when you do that is that one of your apprentices, who isn't as clever, can then try to mimic you, and end up exposing you. As I read the book, I realized that this is exactly the hateful logic that was displayed a decade later, in the most blatant and ugly way, in the work of Anita Sarkeesian. McIntosh is better than Sarkeesian at disguising the hate. He avoids using words like patriarchy, which he knows are a dead giveaway. But, by quoting from Hooks, he exposes that he has internalized her misandry. McIntosh is still full of himself, and we all know what that means. It's also quite obvious that we can find the influence of this ideology in The Last Jedi. Just like Hooks disregards the story of Western civilization to tell a different story, so does Rian Johnson throw away the old Lucas story to tell a different story, in which the old heroes are portrayed as patriarchal dominators. In Lucas' story, the Jedi were Buddhists, and Luke was the Westerner rebelling against them. In Johnson's story, Luke is the Buddhist, who denounces the legacy of the Jedi because they wanted power. At one point he suggests that the Jedi were vain and believed that the Force belongs to them. But we never saw any sign of that in the Lucas movies. There's one last thing I want to touch upon. Believe it or not, McIntosh actually managed to make me laugh with this video. And no, it wasn't the 3 months part, because I remember how long Tropes vs. Women took. It's this part.
Had Yoda been interested in actually helping Anakin, there are a whole host of things he could have done. First, he could have acknowledged and validated Anakin's fears. He could have listened and shown a little bit of empathy. And he could have encouraged Anakin to seek counseling for his obvious trauma and anxiety.
And if all fails, you can always join Jedi Anonymous, a help group run by a wise and articulate Jedi. I mock it not because I don't think that men should turn to counseling when they are in distress, but that's when they can't handle it themselves, when they don't know how to end the suffering. Then they should ask for help, and there are ways to help them. Ending the suffering, however, will only get you to a level of non-suffering, which is a neutral level. There is a level above that neutral level, and that is the level of happiness. We have mentioned several groups in this video: the Stoics, the Buddhists, the Samurai, the Jedi, and we've discussed the philosophical differences between them. But there is also one thing that they all share, and that is the aspiration to greatness, to a life that transcends regular human life. And the reason they want greatness is that, according to their beliefs, it carries with it the promise of ultimate joy. But to achieve this greatness and this joy, you have to be prepared to make sacrifices. Before you get there, you have to go through hardship and pain, and give up on things.
Only way to overcome the dark side is through discipline. The dark side is pleasure, biological, and temporary, and easy to achieve. The light side is joy, everlasting, and difficult to achieve. The great challenge must overcome laziness, give up quick pleasures, and overcome fear, which leads to hate. Amen.
But McIntosh doesn't even realize that there is this higher level. To him, there are only two levels, the level of suffering and the neutral level, and his highest aspiration is to achieve the neutral level. That is why he can't tell the difference between the Jedi and regular folks, and thinks that the difficult path chosen by the Jedi represents society at large. If Anakin is suffering, he always has the option to leave the Jedi Order and end the suffering. But if he chooses to stay, he must deal with the suffering in the Jedi way, if he wants to achieve greatness. But McIntosh, because he doesn't recognize greatness, can't tell the difference. All he cares about is that someone is suffering, and we need to end the suffering. That is why he is so censorious. He doesn't care if an artist created something great, which brings joy to numerous people. If the art causes discomfort to someone, it has to be censored. That is also why he is such a dilettante, who never bothers to do any serious research and study the subject that he is critiquing. A great work of art opens new horizons before you, and if you engage with it and allow it to take you where it wants to take you, you can grow as a human being, become greater than you were. But when McIntosh approaches art, all he cares about is displaying his moral superiority over it. Instead of opening his mind and letting the art take him on a journey to the unknown, all he can offer is banal readings that feel like a seminar work written by a first-degree student, where all he does is to take some feminist theory and show how it can apply to the work in question. The art is reduced into nothingness. And this is also the thing that bothered me the most about The Last Jedi. It is such a small movie. Lucas's Star Wars expanded our world, compelled us to deal with alien situations and question our prejudices. Rian Johnson took the universe that he created and reduced it to something that feels like current-day America. There is no greatness in the movie. The Jedi way used to be something that takes a lifetime of training to achieve. Now it has been reduced into something that can be learned in a couple of days. And the smallness is also the thing I see the most in Jonathan McIntosh, the reason why he makes me sad when I watch him. Just like Rian Johnson made the Star Wars universe small and unexceptional, so does McIntosh do to every subject that he touches. Which makes it more amazing when I remember who he is. When I watch him do his thing, it's hard for me to wrap my head around the idea that this shallow, lazy, banal and pathetic little man might one day be remembered as one half of the duo that killed feminism.